You think supports have no impact on the game? Are you finding yourself unable to climb on support? Well, let me help you out. I'm a master support player that has been coaching amateur teams and individuals over the last few years, and this is part one of a multi part series on how to carry and climb on support. The first topic we're going to dive into is, in my opinion, the most important thing for a support to learn: vision. You can argue that other things are more important, but I find that they don't matter as much at lower elo, or that your skill can make up for a lack of knowledge in those areas to get you by. Vision, though, I never see being done right. Even all the way in Masters, people are still getting it wrong. The big thing that I tell players and teams that I coach is that vision is king. Vision is responsible for setting up plays, preventing ganks, getting picks, getting objectives, etc. It gives you and your team information and helps you figure out what you should or shouldn't be doing. And it can often be the difference between someone getting caught at a crucial moment in the late game or the difference of whether or not a team fight is a winning or losing fight. As for when and where to ward, the simplest answer is ward where people are going to walk and ward around you. But it isn't obvious. We have to put a bit more thought into it than that. We want our wards to be meaningful, so I've done my best to break up the game into different sections to better help explain my thought process of when and where we want to ward during the game. So in the early game, with our laning phase, a lot of where we want to ward revolves around where we're trying to stand. If we're on blue side and we're standing here, wave is here, enemies are here. Where we want to ward is going to be determinative of where we think we're going to get ganked from. So if we're blue side here, enemy jungler is going to come from here, here, a couple different paths. Or he could potentially come from here. Those are all the different paths that he can come from. Obviously, if he comes from his jungle, or more so from laning phase, we don't really have to worry about that path. So we're going to ignore that one. If he comes from the river, and we're standing here, we typically don't have to ward. Unless the enemy has really good setup for him, and that jungler has a lot of movement speed, we typically don't have to do anything. This one's a bit more important to be worried about, though. So we typically want to get a ward in that tri-bush there, just so that way, like, hey, we catch him running around, we can run away. This doesn't help too much if he's coming from this angle, though, as it's going to kind of catch him a little bit too late. However, if you're doing proper jungler tracking, you should know whether or not the enemy jungler is running around inside your bot side jungle in this situation. And if he is, then you should be making sure that you get a ward back here and that you're playing more safe by your turret instead of standing up here. Same thing goes for when you're on red side. So, once again, we don't need to worry about anything from the lane. Enemy is going to kind of give away if the jungler is going for lane gank. And even then, he still has to cross a lot of distance, and they're going to have to run up through the wave and get you and whatnot. They're going to make it pretty obvious that they're coming for you. This, though, because of how this bush is situated here, you're going to have a lot of time to see him coming up, because they will typically run straight like this. So you'll have plenty of time. You'll see him about here, and that gives you plenty of time to run away. Once again, you just have to worry about setup from your opponents. If they have a lot of setup, then you can get a ward in this bush, or if the enemy jungler is very fast, you can get a ward in that bush. But it's typically not a huge deal. This new bush here is very threatening to the red side bot lane. Since vision kind of cuts off at about here, it's very easy for the jungler to, especially early game, it's very easy for the jungler to either go Raptors, red, Krugs, or even if he's starting blue side, he comes in and does that, or go red, Raptors, Krugs, or if he's a jungler that can do a good level 2 gank, he can just go straight from red, or go red Krugs, or some combination of that. And then they'll run up through here, and they'll gank you from behind, giving you no time to react. Early game, you're not going to have the wards available to quite deal with this, and it's more so an issue if you're standing more like here than you are there. But for the most part, you just kind of have to keep that in mind. And typically a ward here, if you're standing up more so than what we have in this example, Like I said, if you're standing more so in the middle of the lane than kind of at the offset, then a ward in the Pixel Brush typically does the job as long as the enemy jungler hasn't already snuck in behind you. You just really need to ward Tribush if you're scared about getting ganked, because this is typically enough time for you to get out, warding Pixel Brush as needed based on matchups. Now, let's say you're pushing up, you're pushing in the wave, you've got more of a position in the middle of the wave, the enemy's just sitting over here, or red side here, wave is sitting more here. This Tribush is important to ward, and this pixel is important to ward. However, this pixel is more important to ward because of the fact that it is more likely for the enemy jungler to path through that pixel brush to get onto you. It's less likely that they path behind you to get there. Most junglers at most ranks, until you get to a higher rank, don't want to do this path like this. They'd rather just come straight through here, or if they want to go through the Tribush, they'll run through the river instead, and they'll get caught on the ward. So typically, the pixel brush is all you really need, unless you know that the enemy jungler is in your bot side, in which case, once again, you shouldn't be in this situation. You should be trying to hug your turret more. Same concept goes for if you're on blue side as well. If you're sitting in more in the middle of the lane and you're pushing into the enemy tower, this pixel brush is all you really need. However, it gets a little bit more complicated as it is much more feasible for the enemy jungler to come take your raptor camp and then path down and gank you from here or from here. So that is something that you have to be a little bit more aware of. Oftentimes, you'll just put a pink ward in the back brush, and the same thing you can do on red side as well. But typically, pink ward in the back brush gives you a good enough warning. As long as you're just positioning properly, that's all you really need. So let's talk about when we're pushing. Let's say we are blue side. Typically, you'll end up getting a ward in this Tribush. You'll end up having a ward in here. What's going to end up happening is if you're doing things properly, you'll already have this bush warded, or you'll have this bush warded based on what happens when you come back to lane. So let's say this bush is, or let's say nothing's warded. I guess that's a better way of putting it. What you should do is when you push this in, you push this wave in, you and your ADC should run and get vision down. Get vision here, get vision here. Those are two important spots. But even then, depending upon how much time you have, you could get vision all the way up here or all the way over here, depending upon how much time you have. If you push in a cannon wave into this turret, you especially have a lot of time. But we need to get vision down before we continue our pressure onto that turret. Because we cannot be standing here when this whole map is completely dark. It gives our opponents too many angles to gank us from, and we don't want that. So before you stand and attack, before you stand and attack tower, unless obviously you know that the enemy jungler is on the other side of the map, and even then, when the enemy jungler is on the other side of the map, you're typically going to want to ward anyways, so that way you can catch him when he comes back towards the bot side, so that way you know not to be standing attacking the tower. But getting a ward here is very important. Getting a ward here is important. Getting a ward here, if possible, is extremely, extremely, extremely important. Because it will catch him running from the blue buff or the Gromp. Every time. This will catch him going to Gromp, going to blue buff, and leaving. It will catch him going up this way to gank mid, or to look for an invade of some sort, or to get the scuttle. And it will catch him, once again, going here, here. It will also, if he decides that, he wants to lane gank, that also will work as well. It's especially good for junglers that have really good level 6 ultimates that they can gank you from afar, like Nocturne and Rengar. And then if you can ward up in river, even if it's just a ward here, it does help. It does do a bit more than this ward in the pixel brush, assuming that you have the Tribush warded, since this pixel brush will ward this area. But if we have Tribush warded, then we've got this zone warded, and then we have this zone warded. The only time that this pixel brush does more is if the enemy's coming from behind, in which case you could just have your pink ward in here to control that zone, and then we don't need a ward in pixel brush ever. Same concept for if you're red side, pushing onto blue side. Once again, before you push onto that turret, you've got to wrap in, and you got to get a ward down here. You can also, if you're trying to get good deep vision down. Like I said, a ward here is pretty good. A ward on Krugs is also pretty good because typically what will happen will be the enemy will, if he's clearing bot to top, Raptors, red, Krugs, then once he finishes Krugs, you will have spotted him finishing Krugs, and so you'll know to leave the area. Also, if he wants to go and gank bot, a lot of times junglers will be like, oh, let me be efficient, let me clear my Krugs, and then I'll come gank. Once again, this ward catches him. And it's hard to kind of walk up all the way over here and get vision down and then walk back. So typically we don't put a ward all the way up there, although it is useful, and we will cover warding there a bit. But typically, this ward covers a lot. You could also just ward over here as well, because this will also still catch him coming from Krug. Any wards in this section are pretty good at catching out the jungler before he gets to you. Typically, if you don't have the time, just a ward here is good. Having a ward here is good. And then once again, if the enemy jungler decides that he wants to gank you from here, most of them aren't going to do that, but you can always just have a pink here. Preferably, though, you just have your pink here, just because most junglers are not going to spend their entire time going all the way down like this. The mid lanes might, and if the jungler ganks mid and then decides he's going to path towards bot, he might do this type of path. But you just have to be paying attention, like, oh, hey, jungler is just mid, or mid is Mia, we need to leave the area because this is a path they might take, and we might get screwed by it. The final thing to note for when you're just sitting in lane is going to be these wards here, or these bushes here. Typically, you don't ward these bushes except to stop the enemy from having full control over them. A lot of times, if you're going up against a Blitzcrank or a Nautilus or something, they'll like to run into here and then sit in here inside fog and look to throw hooks at you. We don't want that, obviously, a lot of times, especially if we want the ability to poke them as well. So if we throw a ward in here, when they walk in there, we can still auto them or throw abilities at them, knowing exactly where they are, or we can just know, like, hey, they're standing in that bush, so let me, there's minions here, let me stand behind there, so that way my minions are a little wall to block the hook. And then we also know when he's like, oh, hey, I want to go and fight, so then you can be like, okay, well, we'll run, or we'll go that way, depending upon where your wave is and how you want to play it, or, you could just say, like, well, you're not really scary there, we're just going to go and attack your ADC. Different options that you get. The other thing that you need to worry about is, let's say we're red side here, and we're getting shoved in. We're getting shoved into turret. Before we get to turret, we want to make sure that as we're getting shoved backwards, that we drop a ward down here. If we are worried about, once again, those hook champions, those champions that have good ways of getting on us and locking us down, or if we're worried about a gank. Because what's going to happen is the wave's going to come in, and then it's going to reset and get pushed back out. And on the push back out, if the enemy is sitting in this bush, what's going to happen is the wave is going to be here, and you are going to be unable to walk up, because if you walk up, they go on you and kill you. And if you don't walk up, well, then you're sitting back here losing XP and CS. But there's always a chance that, like, they're not even there and they're sitting back here, or that they've just backed completely. And you don't know because you don't have this ward. So if you ward this, then you don't have to worry about that. And it's, once again, it's important because you could get ganked from there. There are a lot of times where the enemy jungler, this is mostly at higher elo, but the enemy jungler will sneak in and sit here. And then as the wave starts bouncing back, the enemy bot lane is sitting here. Waves are here. And as you come up to farm the wave, the jungler goes on you, everybody goes on you, and you get screwed. The other thing that the enemy jungler likes to do when he's in this situation is sit here for a counter gank. As his team is on here, let's say this is you, this is the enemy. What's going to probably happen is, in a lot of games, once again, mostly at high elo, your jungler is going to path down, try to look for a gank, and the enemy jungler is going to be there waiting, and they're going to collapse on this guy, or you guys are going to take a fight that you think is a 3v2 when it's actually a 3v3, and you're going to lose because you don't know that this guy's in the So that covers a lot of what's going to be happening in the lane itself. And remember, sometimes you're going to have very limited wards before you get access to your upgraded ward item. So remember to buy control wards when you have the extra cash, especially if you got 150 extra cash lying around, buy 2 control wards. You might think you're wasting money. You're not. You're going to use them up. Trust me. So outside the lane itself, in the early and mid game, you're going to be roaming around the map whenever you're typically leaving base, or if there's just downtime in bot lane. Roaming itself is going to end up being a separate video, but for now, pretty much when you're roaming around, you're going to be looking to make plays, and you're going to be getting vision down on the map because a lot of times there's not going to be plays to make on the map. You're typically going to be running towards mid lane looking to make a play, typically with a path like this, or depending upon what's going on in places, you might path like this. If you're on the red side, you might path like this, path like this. A couple different branching paths. But the main thing is that you're typically playing to have eyes on mid lane. And like I said, a lot of times there's not necessarily a play to make. You're kind of just there as a just in case. And while you're out on the map, you're getting vision down. Sometimes you're just dropping vision here, here, here. You know, it depends on like how far you want to be going. But if we're coming, typically, like if I'm coming from base here, and I'm looking to potentially gank mid, you know, I'll come in, I'll sweep this area here, looking like, hey, is there a thing mid? No, okay, like I'm coming here. And then, depending upon where the enemy jungler is and whatnot, you know, I might drop a ward here, might drop a ward here if I feel like we're going to get invaded on. Might drop a ward here if I'm going to run down here, get my vision down here, and come back to lane. Also have the option of, if I want to play more passive and safe, you know, I can, once again, I can come here, drop back this way, I can drop a ward anywhere in this area here, so that way I can catch the enemy jungler sit through here. You can also put a ward here as well. That pretty much covers everything. It covers this whole section here. Is pretty good. People don't really expect that. The enemy jungler can sweep in through here or through here. They don't really do that though. They typically run straight through. So this is another good spot to ward. And then I'm running back here, dropping down my vision here as I'm coming back to lane. Same thing for red side. Running here. Red side's a lot better for warding because I can drop a ward here. Once again, if you're on blue side and you're running up, and if you got the time, you can once again drop vision here, cover the whole jungle, so that way anytime the enemy jungler walks through, you know, like, hey, like, enemy jungler here. Great. When you're on red side, it's a little bit easier to get a good ward down because this ward, once again, this ward covers everything. So anytime the enemy jungler decides like, hey, I want to gank mid, well, now we've caught him out. Anytime he's like, hey, I'm gonna path from, you know, let's say he ganks from top jungle or top river into mid, and then he goes, hey, I'm gonna go to my raptors. Well, now you've caught him out. Anytime he goes, I'm gonna go raptors into river into dragon, you know, this ward here catches a lot. If you want, you could get further vision down, but it's typically not needed unless the game state's further along. But the other, once again, warding here, all good spots, warding here, but this is typically not something you're going to ever really get because that more or less requires this. And that's something you'd more so be doing if you have your jungler with you, so it's not really super important. And once again, warding here is fine, especially because, you know, it catches this, but a ward by the Raptors is better. And then it's just like, hey, you know, I can get vision down here and here as I'm running through, and then I can get vision here. And now, with just those 3 wards, I've covered all of this. Well, I guess more like all of this area here. You know, I covered this area here. Enemy Jungler doesn't really have a gank path now outside of through the lane itself. As the game progresses to the mid and late game, there's two different modes that I want to say that I view the game in. There's the what I call the quote unquote like stagnant mode, where you're kind of just pushing waves back and forth while you're sitting in mid lane with your ADC, since you should be swapping your ADC in mid. And you're kind of just waiting for the next objective to be up. And then there's the other mode, which is when that objective is going to be up and you're fighting for space for that objective. So in the quote unquote stagnant mode, where you're sitting there and you're just waiting, there is stuff that we can be doing to start pushing to get an advantage somewhere. So if we're in mid, we're just back, forth, back, forth, back, forth with pushing waves. First off, we want to make sure that if we're standing here, I know that the map view is a little wonky, but it's much easier to view the map this way, top down, than it is on a side view. We want to make sure that we have whatever side of the map that we want to play towards warded. And once again, like if you're standing here, you typically want to have wards here, just safety wards. Safety wards so that it's like, hey, enemies coming down. No, we know we need to leave because we're going to get ganked from here. Same thing on this side. If we're standing here, we should have a ward here. Ward here typically does the trick. It catches everything, which, by the way, for these bushes in mid, you don't want to ward exactly next to the wall. If you ward next to the ward sees like this. Like this. It's really bad. If you ward more up, it doesn't have to be in the center of it. It can be like just a third of the way up. It'll catch the whole thing. But there's a lot of times, especially if you're trying to ward from this wall over to here, if you ward next to the wall, you don't see everything, and it's pretty bad. Let's say we have the ability to actually push the wave out. When we push this wave, what you need to be doing is you need to be calling over your team typically, because you want your team to be with you so that way you don't die. You want to be going and getting control of an area. For this example, let's say we're playing towards top. We're going to be pathing up towards here. We're going to be getting vision down in our key areas. And then we're going to be leaving again. That's all we're going to be doing. We're going up and then leaving. And then catching the wave again. And then it's like, hey, okay, like I warded. Could ward here as well. And like I said, for this example, same thing. You can walk up here after you push in the wave. You can get vision down here, here's fine. Ward over this wall here is pretty good as well. Push another wave. We recall to base. Okay, recall to base. Get fresh wards. If during the mid and especially during the game, if you do not have a full set of wards on you, especially if you need at least 3, preferably. You can get away with 2 sometimes. If you don't have a full set of wards, if you don't have fresh control wards on you, you should be looking the back when possible. If you feel like you're getting shoved in, then all you need to do is have some defensive wards down, ward here, here, once again here, in the bushes if you can get them, behind you, over here, anything to help it so that when you're sitting under here, you know if the enemy's trying to collapse on you. Same concept when you're on red side, safety wards and everything. It all plays out the exact same, just flipped. Now, when it comes to the objectives, you want to be having wards on the objectives before they spawn. Typically, if there's like a minute left or so, minute 30, you want to be saying, I need to get over there. I need to be getting vision down. Once again, if you're sitting in mid with your team, just say, hey, I want to shove this out. I want to go in and get vision down. Once again, get vision down in our key areas. Here. Potentially over in Tribush, although it's not really needed. Even just if you feel like you need to go in and out real fast, just wards here. Typically, this ward here doesn't see a ton unless the enemy's coming from the bottom side here. It's, in my opinion, much better to just get your wards here and here, preferably in this brush, because once again, this ward here doesn't see if they walk through the brush. Just this ward only lets you know if they're doing dragon. Only lets you know if they're in this spot. It doesn't let you know if they're sitting here. It doesn't let you know if they've been through here or anything. Because the enemy should be doing the same thing. The enemy should be trying to walk in here and get vision down here. You know, get vision there, get vision there. Try to take. They want to take control of this space. You want to take control of this space. Everybody should be having the same concept as you, but lower ranked players are going to be bad, and they're not going to be getting vision control. But you want to be getting that control early. You want to get there first. And you typically want to get there and then back and get fresh wards. Once again, fresh wards. You want to have fresh wards on you at all times if possible. When you guys, if you commit to this dragon, you do have to be pretty careful about this wall here. Depending upon what champions you're up against, if there's champs with like good range, or if you're like posturing for this dragon or whatnot, this wall can be very scary since the enemies can attack over, and if you can't see them, it can be very problematic. So a lot of times, if you're fighting to stand in this space here, you want to make sure that you have this this warded in some fashion, whether it's here or whether it's here. You want to make sure that this is warded, because otherwise you can never stand here without the enemy sitting here and attacking you. Also, another space that you might want to have warded is down here in this pixel brush, or just anywhere in here is fine as well. It doesn't have to be that brush per se, but if you're trying to, once again, if you're trying to stand in here, think about where the enemy is going to come from. Your vision, you know, let's say it only extends here. So even if you get a ward here, that helps you see all this a little bit faster, and that's fine. Obviously, we would prefer if the ward is more here, since that way then we could see the brush, especially if we decide that we want to go and attack them. But yeah, if we have vision control down, you know, while we're sitting on the dragon, we need to know, like, hey, enemies coming to contest us, you know, we need to turn. Or like, hey, we can't fight that, so whoops, racer. Like, hey, we can't fight the enemy coming at us, so we need to run. And then with this control, with this vision control, we can see like, hey, they're all 5 here running at us. We can run out safely this way. Or like, hey, they've got 2 here and 3 here. We should collapse on the one side and force a fight, etc., etc., etc. Same concept with Baron. Get there early, get wards down, make sure you have fresh wards. When you're running through, you know, if you're blue side, once again, vision here, vision here. Typically at this stage of the game, you can get more aggressive vision control out. You know, you just ward over walls, so that way jungler doesn't like get over and smite it. Same concept applies, once again, red side. Here, this wall, once again, very scary. Would really like to have a ward here or a ward here. It can be a very big difference between, especially like, oftentimes what's going to happen is you're going to run up through here, okay? You're going to get a ward down here, and then, you know, sometimes, you know, you'll drop like a pink ward here just to make sure the Baron's not warded, and then you might have a ward here. You got to be very careful of like the enemy comes through here and then runs this way. It's very scary. Even if you have a ward here, there's kind of this dead zone here. Just don't really know what's going on in. But typically you don't even have this ward. And it can be very scary, and just that lack of knowledge can be the difference as to whether or not you win or lose a fight coming up. And not knowing like where this enemy is, you know, are they sitting here? Or are they wrapping around to fight us? Putting a ward here, putting a ward in this brush is always, you're always losing out on something. It's very hard to see the entire thing. You put a ward here, you know, you only see this, bit. If you put a ward here, you know, you only see this bit. And if you put a ward here, well then you kind of only really see this bit. You need 2 wards to be able to fully see the entire thing around this space. A lot of times, you just don't have that many wards to put out. So, a ward here does the job. Ward here does the job. Lets you make sure, like, hey, they don't go over, or wrap around, all that nonsense. And it makes a big difference. I guess the last thing for warding in general is just, like I said at the start, ward where people are going to be walking. Wherever you think someone might end up being, you get a ward there. Also, don't want to be warding there when they're already there, so if you think somebody's already in the area you want to ward, don't walk up there. At least not by yourself, especially if you're an enchanter, don't walk up there. But the more space you end up taking, the better. And just that's how you want to view vision control, is taking space, taking control of an area. Like I said, you push this, come up here, you get control here, you get control here, and now you've got control of their entire red side. Now from now on, you can decide, hey, we can go and safely do dragon. We can go and safely rotate towards top side. Or we can now safely get this turret or get the next turret, We know that, like, hey, the enemy is running over to gank us, or to rotate to kill us, or to just come over. Like, now we can go to the other side of the map, or we can kill that person. Enemies coming to contest us. We can go and turn. Vision gives you so much control over the game, it's insane. So hopefully this was a pretty informative video. I think I glossed over a few things, but more or less, you should all be getting the idea. Get more vision down on the map. Vision is a very, very easy way to climb more without having to improve your skill. All you're doing is giving your team more information to make better informed decisions. So thanks guys for watching. Just as a reminder, I do coaching. You can click the links in the description below. I can coach every role, although support is my best. And I will have more videos in this series in the near future.